Adapt or die. Be flexible. As hard as it is, you got to do everything you can to be flexible and adapt to the circumstances. Respect is most important when it comes to being in pro football or running a business. You want people to respect you, but for that to happen, you got to earn their trust.
What do you think are the top traits you got to have as a Gruden grinder?
You can be as physically strong and as talented as anybody in the world, but if you don't have mental toughness, you aren't going to win a championship. You are not going to be a great success. Find your passion, man.
As I was looking through your background and thinking about how you grew up, I was wondering, like, how'd you get the bug for football? And I was just kind of imagining you and Jay maybe running around, football facilities with your dad. Is that accurate, or how did that work? How'd you fall in love with the game?
My dad was a football coach since I was born, and whether it be high school, college, or NFL, we've been going to locker rooms and going to meeting rooms since I can remember. And when he got the job at Indiana in the Big Ten, the big time football, when we got to play Ohio State and go to see some cool stadiums and great teams, Archie Griffin. And then he got the job at Notre Dame. Joe Montana was our quarterback. And that's where I went to high school. And just being around the kind of kids they had at Notre Dame and the way they won, there was really nothing else for me to do. I knew I wanted to coach when I was about 14 years old. I knew I wasn't worth a damn as a player, you see. So yeah. I said, maybe I could have one of these jobs at Notre Dame someday. That was always in the back of my mind. And I was lucky to see it firsthand.
Well, I see behind you, you've got some images of some people. I'm not sure if those are Gruden grinders, but I wanted to ask you about this. I'm wondering, we always talk about sort of the traits of the best leaders, but help me understand, what do you think are the top traits you got to have as a Gruden grinder?
So Gruden Grinders got a series of traits. Number one is you're kind of off the radar. I think everybody talks about the quarterback. Everybody talks about the leading passing receiver, that leading the league in sacks, who's got the number one defense, but no one really talks about the nuts and bolts of some of the guys that really do the dirty work behind the scenes. So number one, you're off the radar. Number two, you're tough. You're freaking tough, man, mentally and physically tough. And you check your ego at the door. Number three, you got no ego. You'll go in there and stop the run. You'll clear out a deep zone. You'll play as good without the ball as you do with the ball. So having no ego, being selfless is a big part of it. Being smart and being versatile, a guy that can go into the game and play inside or outside, play on special teams, a guy that's got some versatility and some brains, doesn't make mistakes. And number one, I think the most important thing is you're a high effort finisher. You strain, you bust your ass all the time. You lead the league in effort because it takes no talent. When it's time to go out and do the job, you do it. And it doesn't matter if you're sore. It doesn't matter if you're behind. It doesn't matter if it's raining or you're on the road. You go out and do your job when you're called upon. You have that clutch, timely ability as well. But those are the key things that we look for in these Gruden grinders.
Who are some of the guys that you feel like have sort of earned that distinction?
I think one of the first Gruden grinders we discovered was Rob Ninkovich of the Patriots. Ninkovich played outside linebacker. He had been cut by a couple different teams. He went to New England. He played nickel defensive end. He could walk around and cover a tight end. He did whatever the Patriots asked him to do. Mike Vrabel was another guy that was a Gruden grinder. We had a tackle, Barry Sims, with the Raiders. We kind of referred to him as a Gruden grinder. I remember he could play a number of positions, and one day we needed him to start at left tackle against Bruce Smith in Buffalo. And he went out there and did a hell of a job. But, just guys that get the most out of their ability. Rondé Barber was, even though he was a Hall of Famer, he was probably my favorite all-time Gruden grinder. He wasn't the biggest guy. He did not have the size or the speed to do what he accomplished on the field. He did it with intense preparation and all of those things I just talked to you about. He would be a guy that I would think is the mold for the Gruden grinder.
I want to ask you about some of your influences. Yeah, I think of Walt Harris, the guy who you said helped you understand or learn how to cut tape. I think of Bob McKitrick. I think in your book, you said he's the greatest coach you've ever been around. Tell me about these guys. How do they impact you?
Bob McKitrick, he was the Gruden grinder because he never got the credit. He wasn't the coordinator. He was never the head coach, but he could coach more football in 30 minutes than most guys could coach in a whole week. I mean, he spent more time getting ready for the meeting than he did getting ready for anything, getting ready for the game. I mean, he spent countless hours getting the tapes ready, getting his boards ready, getting ready, the things that he wanted to cover. He put an intense preparation into his meetings, and he was a great teacher. He could demonstrate how to get on the Crowther sled. They had this old sled. It was called the Crowther sled. He would get on there and take you through all of the different blocks that you could make. It's called the Crowther progression. Tommy Prothro taught it to him at UCLA. But he could demonstrate. He was an ex-Marine. He set the tone with his mentality. He was a tough guy, and I loved him. And I learned more in his meetings than I ever learned about football before.
Just you're thinking about the time that you were at the University of Pacific. I told you earlier, I grew up in the Bay Area. I didn't even know where that was. I had never even heard of it, so, I mean, you were at the University of Pacific and you get a call from a guy named Mike Holmgren. And he offers you a job, which really kind of never existed at the time. Right? It might not have been the most glorious job. And your dad says to you, just work your ass off, but don't let your ambition get in the way of the respect for what these people have done. Coach, looking back at that, did you know the sort of gravity of the situation that you were getting into?
Absolutely. I mean, I was coaching tight ends at the University of Pacific, and we ran a no-back offense. We didn't even have a tight end. But I was really helping Walt Harris, my old boss at Tennessee, and we were turning that program around in Stockton, California. It wasn't easy, but I was really excited to be a Division I coach. But when the 49er quality control job came open, I think I was the first quality control coach ever hired in the NFL. I didn't even know what the hell quality control meant, but that's what my name was in the media guide. But they had been back-to-back Super Bowl winning champions. Joe was there, the quarterback. They had everything in place. Roger Craig and Ronnie Lott, Charles Haley, and they had everything. And they had just kicked everybody's ass the previous season. And it was an offense that I always wanted to learn because of the rhythm of the offense, the formations, the way they played. They were on the cutting edge of everything. And then when you got to see the facility and meet Eddie DeBardlo, and then you realize everything the 49ers did, they were on the cutting edge, how they traveled, their facility, how they practiced, how they had meetings. Everything was a step ahead of everybody. And there was no salary cap at that time. Our nose tackles were Michael Carter, who was the best. Then they got Fred Smerlas from the Buffalo Bills, who was the best in the AFC. Then they had Jim Burt from the Giants. So we had the best players, we had the best coaches, the best facility, and to be a part of that, man, I start sweating thinking about it. That'll never be duplicated.
I didn't know there was no salary cap back then, so I didn't know you could do that.
Steve Young was our backup quarterback to Joe Montana, so we had a number of great players, and it was awesome.
All right. I got a whole line of questions about that whole Montana Young situation. But before I get there, I want to ask you, I think of like some of your superpowers, one of them being adaptability. So, I know you're known for cutting up tape. So I've got a couple of videos for you real quick.
I was going on vacation for the summer before training camp. And I told John, I said, he was newly hired. And I said, do you know computers? And he said, no. And I said, okay, I'm going to be gone a month. When I get back, I want you to be a computer genius because we're going to computers. And he said, fine. He said, good. And sure enough, when I came back, he had it all set up. And I said, this young man has a future. He's pretty good.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
I thought that was pretty amazing. And I think adaptability, I think like you're from coaching, you mentioned like you had to coach tight ends. I know you didn't want to do that when that was presented to you. You were an analyst. We know now that's not easy when we see some of the greats have to do it. you became a coach again, and there was a whole new set of rules, right? You couldn't practice as much as you practiced. So I think one of your superpowers, coach, is adaptability. And I think it's important for people in their careers and their lives to build that sort of trait. And so my question to you is like, how do we do a better job of being more adaptable?
It's probably, one of the great questions that exists, because part of you, maybe I'm guilty of fighting to keep things the way they were. I was raising my hand. I'd say, no, let's not change the freaking rule. I don't want to move the extra point back. Bullshit. We don't need to eliminate all the padded practices. So I think you fight for what is right. But at the same time, when you lose the battle, it's like the election, honestly. Whoever wins the election, there's going to be people that are elated, and there's going to be people that are really ticked off. But you got to adapt, and you got to get together and be on the same team and pull together and rally around whoever it is. You know what I'm saying? So whatever the rules are, whenever they're determined, you can't worry about all the things you can't control. So when the verdict comes down and the playing field is set, you got to redefine and readapt to what the rules are. And every year they're going to change. Your schedule's going to change. Your roster's going to change. The rules are going to change. Hell, the weather's going to change. And adapt or die. Be flexible, as hard as it is for me, because I'm not the most flexible person. But I think you got to do everything you can to be flexible and adapt to the circumstances.
That's great advice. You mentioned control what you can control. And I was thinking about the time you spent with Steve Young in that whole situation. It seemed like when I read your book, it seemed kind of like maybe you guys had a unique relationship, right? Because you weren't the head coach, but like you probably could empathize with him. Is there a lesson about believing in yourself, maybe staying the course when you think back to that sort of Montana Young situation that we can learn from?
I use Steve Young as an example with a lot of backup quarterbacks and young guys that aren't getting their opportunity that they think they deserve. Joe Theismann and Steve Young have gold jackets, and they never really became full-time starters until they were 30. And the last thing Steve Young needed to hear from me was, hey, just be patient. Hey, you're going to get your shot, Steve. Bullshit. I want to play right now. These are the alpha competitors that you have in this world. And I think the one thing I learned from Steve is my dad drafted Steve with the Buccaneers. My dad drafted him out of the USFL. He was the personnel director of the Buccaneers. And then Ray Perkins came in and he told my dad to get rid of him, trade him. And because my dad knew John McVay, he traded him to the 49ers. But Steve was not good in Tampa. The system was bad. You just said it about Minshew. They don't have a quarterback. Well, that's because, it's a lot of hands are involved in that. But anyway, Steve didn't play well in Tampa. Then he went to the 49ers and he sat there just like I sat there as a quality control man. And he watched Joe Montana just kicking the shit out of everybody, throwing the ball to the tight end, Roger Craig, the receivers. Everybody was ball distribution, winning games. And Steve wanted to play for that offense. He's like, I don't want to go play for those. I don't want to get traded to the Bears, freeze my ass off and get my brains beat in. I don't want to go to Detroit. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay right here. And he kept competing with Joe. And because of the salary cap, I think they could afford to keep those guys together, you see. And, Bill Walsh, they believed in him. The 49ers saw an upside, a huge upside in him. They reinvented his game. He started winning in the pocket. He learned how to win in the pocket. And then when the pocket broke down, then he took off. He was just taking off in Tampa. But anyways, there is a certain, I think, teaching lesson there, as you just said it with Steve Young. Sometimes be careful what you ask for. Have some patience, and keep developing your skill and be ready when opportunity knocks. And that's what Steve Young did.
Did you get to spend time? I know like Bill left the 49ers when you got there, but like, did you get to spend some time around him? I'm just wondering if there's something that you think we could learn from Bill Walsh. Maybe you had some firsthand experience.
He came out to the Buccaneers a couple times when I was the head coach. We brought him out to spend a week with our staff. And
how was that?
It was awesome.
Amazing.
It's phenomenal. He's the best. He's the best football guy I've ever been around, period. You could say Al Davis and Bill Walsh, but from an offensive perspective, from a organizational perspective, I don't think there's anybody ahead of Bill Walsh. And I think the one thing that he left me the most with was the accumulation of knowledge is a powerful thing. And so is the accumulation of nothing. And you got to work, you got to study. To be creative, you got to study, you got to steal ideas from other people. You got to be stimulated by other offenses. Don't be afraid to watch the top 5 college offenses. Don't be afraid to take a peek at the Canadian Football League. Who's doing well over there? You know, learn some new drills, some new ways of training players. Get into, you know, the developmental process of how to train a quarterback. But just phenomenal leadership and work ethic and vision that he had for offensive football, you know, and really the commandments of how he put his operation together. I remember him talking to our defense about a fourth quarter pass rush. He goes, I don't give a shit how many sacks you have. How many do you have in the fourth quarter? I mean, when Joe Burrow has the ball with 2 minutes left, when Pat Mahomes has the ball and he's down by 6 in the fourth quarter, what's your fourth quarter pass rush? Can you close the game out with defense? And if you don't have a fourth quarter pass rush, you don't have a pass rush. But he had all these great analogies about situational football that he was nice enough to leave all of us in a book. And he was nice enough to come and clinic us and help us get better at, because he knew the accumulation of knowledge would help us all.
A lot of people, I think, struggle with in leadership and management about wanting to be liked. And you said something I thought struck a chord. Not every player will like the coach. And so how do you balance wanting to be liked, being respected, and able to move things forward?
You know, respect is most important when it comes to being in pro football or running a business. You know, you want respect. You want people to respect you, but for that to happen, you got to earn their trust. You got to make them believe in what you're selling. So you can't be a dipshit. You can't walk in there and just wing it. You got to prove to them that you do know what you're talking about. And that doesn't mean you got to be a self-proclaimed genius. You can still be self-deprecating. And at the same time, when you put the game plan together, or you put the practice schedule together, or the calendar together, they should look at it and say, this guy knows what he's doing. This is pretty sharp. This is pretty well thought through. But, you know, I do think, you know, earning people's trust and helping them believe in what we're selling is absolutely key.
So not everyone will like you. Make sure they respect you, earn their trust. And ultimately, that's how you get them to buy into the game plan, it sounds like.
When I was a kid, I went to Bobby Knight's basketball camp when I was in the 9th grade. Bobby Knight's son was my best friend, Tim Knight. My dad coached at Indiana for Lee Corso when the Hoosiers were winning the national championships. And I remember Coach Knight called all of us up and he said, hey, how many of you guys play high school basketball? We all raised our hand. He said, how many of you guys don't like your coach? And almost all of us raised our hand. He said, what makes you think your fucking coach likes you? So it stood out with me. You know, he goes, why don't you do some of the things you don't like to do so your coach, you know, learns to like you? You know, but it was very eye-opening to me. All the players, they want the ball. The real players want the ball. It's hard to please everybody. So you can't really get caught up in, you know, taking guys out to dinner and trying to please everybody and be their friend all the time. It's just too hard.
I've got one more clip for you, Coach.
Back atop the AFC West. This will be their 11th division championship since the merger in 1970.
How about those Raiders, man? You're never going to get this year back in your life. You're never getting it back, whether you're an 8-time Pro Bowler or a no-time Pro Bowler like me. If you're late for work, if you're out of shape, if you're not knowing what to do, you're going to never, ever be able to live with yourself, because you guys got a chance to do some good things. Can we win a championship? There's no doubt in your mind. There's no doubt in your mind. There can be no doubt.
Coach, you're known for many speeches, but what would you say are the keys to being a great motivator? Because I think that's one of the things that you really excelled at.
Thank you. I think you got to know who you're motivating. You got to know who you're talking to. You got to really know how to reach them. Certainly. But I just try to I tried to stir the pot a lot. That was my style. Every once in a while, you might want to try to make these guys laugh and use some humor and be outside the box to make some guys laugh, because you don't really want them to have heard your joke or heard your analogy. You know what I mean? And then the next day, I might really try to piss you off. I mean, piss you off and say some things that really, really, and then maybe one day really try to fire you guys up. I mean, really get you ready to touch the line and become a force, man. And, maybe make you cry one day, get you welled up. Think about some of the emotional aspects of leadership. So I tried to stir the pot, stir the emotions, but I put some careful thought into it. I tried to teach. I tried a lot of analogies. I would always use creative analogies, whether it be a YouTube tape, but I would mix it up a lot, to be honest with you. And it just kind of felt on the mood of the team. It kind of felt on the course of our ship. And I would always try to be on the cutting edge of creativity. That's for sure.
Doug Williams said that you knew how to command attention in a room. And I felt like maybe those are some of the things that you also learned from like Ray Rhodes. You mentioned that he was kind of unique in that sense too.
Ray taught me a lot of the harsh words that I'm in trouble for today. I loved Ray Rhodes so much. You have no idea.
Yeah.
Some of the things he would say to players in the meeting room, I just couldn't believe it. And then I had a chance to be his offensive coordinator for 3 years in Philadelphia, and I absolutely loved his style. And it was hilarious. Sometimes you'd think you're listening to Richard Pryor. And then there were certain days he could really crawl up your ass, man. I mean, he could really tick you off. But he had an unbelievable communication style. And I copied part of it. I stole a lot of ideas from him. And then, having the ability to hire good coaches, I think, is really important too. So you're not always driving the car. I remember when I got the Buccaneer job, I had a bunch of guys I had never coached with, and we broke the team down into 4-game segments. So I would let Mike Tomlin and Raheem, they took 4 games, and they got to speak to the team for those 4 weeks. Then the next 4 weeks, I had another assistant coach, and you develop their leadership, and you help, give them a little critique on how you think they did and how awesome it was, or maybe a way to tweak it. But I think getting everybody selling the same menu to the players every day is an absolutely critical part of it. You just can't have the head coach go in there like some of these places and make this long, profound speech. And then the offensive line coach goes into his room and says, what a dipshit he is. You know what I mean? I think you got to do everything you can to try to get everybody on that leadership of the staff to be buying in and selling the same things.
Coach, can you tell me about the first time you met Al Davis?
Yeah, well, I was coaching for Ray Rhodes, and then the Raiders asked me if I would like to be the offensive coordinator of the Raiders. And at that time, I guess you could go from coordinator to coordinator. So anyways, I went out and I interviewed, and Mike White was the coach, and he wanted me to call the passes, and he wanted Joe Bugle to call the runs. And I said, no, I'm going back to Philadelphia. So when I went over to Al Davis's house in Piedmont to tell him I'm going back to Philly, I felt the wrath for the first time. What do you fucking mean? He was not happy with me. And then the next year when Mike White got fired, they interviewed me for the head coaching job. And I probably spent 5 days out there interviewing with Al. And this was not an interview. This was like a full-scale interrogation. It was awesome. It was really the 4 or 5 best days, I think, of my life. I gave it to Joe Bugle, but then the next year I did the same thing and I got the job. But, you can't prepare for an interview with Al Davis. This is not like an owner who doesn't know football, coming in there to ask you technical questions. There are no technical questions. With Al Davis, he says, who's the third corner of the Chargers? I said, Terrence Shaw. He goes, where's he from? I said, San Jose State. I think that's why I got the job, because he knew that I took pride in knowing personnel. but he would ask you personnel questions. He would toss you the chalk and he would say, draw your punt protection. He would ask you questions he knew you couldn't answer. And, but it really made you want to go back to your hotel and study so you had all the answers of all the questions. He was like the Wizard of Oz, honestly. And I was like the Scarecrow. But over the course of time, he fast-tracked me. He helped me. He gave me a sense of urgency to get your ass up, go in there and look at things that you normally don't look at. Look at things from a different perspective and have the knowledge, at least have the capability to talk to the L3 man on kickoff coverage instead of just yelling at him. Maybe have some technical things to say. And that's one of the things I loved about Bill Walsh too, is he didn't want guys screaming and leading cheers. He'd tell you, he'd say, hey, shut the F up. I want to hear something technical. Don't be cheer. Hey, nice run, Bobby. Let's go, Tommy. He would tell you, shut up, man. But have some technical things to deliver. And I think that's what Al Davis was the best at, because he really did know the game and he knew personnel. And I had a lot of respect for him.
I never knew I just thought he was I knew he was like his history of the game. I just didn't know how knowledgeable he was. I thought that was really, really interesting. Let's fast forward. You mentioned, you got the job. It's 1998. One of the things that you said is it was the most satisfying because all of the responsibility fell on your shoulders. I'd love to hear a little bit about your first year in Oakland, but I'm also mainly curious about what's the kind of advice you give a first-time head coach, a first-time leader. What do you tell them, not to screw it up?
The first thing I would say is stay close to your knowledge base. I was coaching quarterbacks and calling plays in Philadelphia. I was the offensive coordinator. So I didn't go to the Raiders and hire an offensive coordinator to run a different offense. I stayed pretty much in my offensive coordinator role. I stayed really close to the quarterbacks. Matter of fact, I spent all my time with the quarterbacks and I spent all my time with the offense. And I tried to rally and hire a great defensive staff, a great special teams coach. And I would try to rally creatively to sit in some of their meetings and be a part of the other side of the ball. But, I think some guys get jobs. They get a job because why'd you get the job? Because probably you had a hell of a defense, or probably you were a great offensive coordinator. Well, I think if you get the head coaching job, you should make sure your side of your expertise should show up. So I think that'd be the first thing I would recommend. And then secondly, don't rush into hiring a staff. Interview coaches, interview people, and take your time to find the right guys. And, that's something I took a lot of pride in. And Al Davis taught me that. He had me interview coaches at the combine, interview coaches at the Senior Bowl. Sometimes we didn't even have a job open. I'd be interviewing offensive line coach, and line coach I had would come and say, hey, why are you interviewing guys for my job?
That's funny.
But that's how you learn. It goes back to accumulating knowledge. That's how you learn the game. And guys that are fired and available that are out of football, I was taught, make sure you see every one of those guys because they'll tell you everything they know. And that's how you learn perhaps about the teams that they come from, So anyhow, the two things I would recommend: number one, stay close to your knowledge base. And number two, take your time to hire the right staff.
One piece of advice you would have given yourself in year one.
I would have given myself a lot of advice. Well, Al Davis was a night person. I was a morning person. So I probably would have learned to have a different schedule because I thought I was going to die that first year. I'd get in there at 3 a.m. and Al Davis would come looking for me at 10 p.m.
One of the things I've heard you say in like the QB camps and whatnot is like, you'd ask players like, how do you handle pressure? And I'm just wondering, like, what advice do you give like your players? What would you tell them about big moments in terms of like, is that something even talked about, how to handle the pressure better?
It's easy for me to come in and say, hey, don't feel pressure, apply the pressure. That's what I like to say. But, you have to prepare yourself for these pressure moments. Instead of waiting for a critical situation, on game day. You got to practice the critical situations. Let's have a period of 4th and 6, four or five of them in a row. Give me 4 or 5 4th and 6s. Let's have a 3rd down and 7 to 10 blitz period. Practice crunch time situations. Put 12 guys on defense and let them try to block a punt. Test your punt protection. But I think to have the confidence to perform in a pressure-packed situation, you got to have done intense preparation and put yourself on the practice field in those situations. And it sure helps if you have a quarterback like Brett Favre or Rich Gannon, or a guy that has what I call a triple X pouch, a big set of balls. You know what I mean?
He was my favorite growing up. And we'll talk about him in a second. I do want to ask you about just setbacks, because you said sometimes losing teaches you a lot more about yourself and your team than you ever learn from winning. It's easy to be a winner. It's easy to react positively when things go well. Just thinking back, the easy question is like, what was your biggest loss? But like, we all know, what happened. But I don't know, put the Tuck game aside. Is there a setback or a loss that stings the most? So I don't think that was a loss. I think we just kind of got screwed. So is there one outside of that stings the most or maybe it was that game that you learn from?
I mean, there's so many losses. I think losing to the Ravens in the AFC Championship game when Gannon got hurt, that was probably the worst, because we didn't get a chance to really see us against them with our quarterback. He was the MVP of the league. He got hurt on the 2nd or 3rd play of the game. Our center snapped the ball on the wrong count. But that game, the AFC Championship game against Ray Lewis and the Ravens, when they were great, God, I just wish we could have had 4 quarters with Gannon, because they didn't score many points either. But that's probably still the one game that really sticks in my crawl the most. Anytime you lose a game like that, it has a tendency to do that.
How did you convince Rich to come to the Raiders?
You know what? We had a long dinner, and we just went back to the office and had a couple beers and just got to know each other. And we just put all the cards on the table. I had known Paul Hackett, the guy that coached him in Kansas City. And I knew deep down they were going with Elvis Gerback, and that really pissed Rich off. So I knew Rich was really not happy about that. He took the Chiefs basically to the playoffs. And when they got to the playoffs, when they got to the dance, they gave the ball to Gannon. So, he was trained to hate the Raiders. I've been trained to hate the Chiefs. And Rich and I kind of hated everything. We were kind of cut of the same cloth. You know what I mean? Everything irritated us. Everything bothered us. We were like the perfect match at the perfect time for what the Raiders needed. And he was the opposite of Jeff George. The opposite. And Jeff was a great talent, but Rich played the game in a completely different manner, and it's something we needed.
There's this sort of famous quote that he talks about that you said to him, maybe it was that night, we're either going to succeed together or fail together, but we're going to do it together. And that really fired him up.
Yep.
What would you hope that Rich Gannon would say about you as a leader?
I'd hope he'd say that I was consistent. I'd hope he'd say I was pretty much the same guy every day. I think that's the kind of leadership that I like. I'm not saying I didn't go in there and mix up the emotions, but I was really into it. I was totally invested in it, and I did want to try to help everybody win and get better.
He said he was consistent, a great communicator, and a really good listener who valued feedback. He respected the people that he worked with and clearly communicated the message and the plan each week. He was very detailed because he helped build the plan. He also helped install it, teach it, and coach it. From a leadership perspective, I cherish that because he had a vested interest not only in the results, but getting there. How does that kind of make you feel when you sort of mirrored what he said, but how does that make you feel knowing that was your guy?
I mean, that makes me feel great. I spent so much time with the quarterback for 4 years. I spent more time with Rich than I did my wife. I bet Derek Carr would probably feel the same way. I spent a lot of time with these guys, and they help you recruit players. Jerry Rice came to the Raiders because of Rich Gannon. Rich and I took Jerry golfing, and your quarterback he's the straw that stirs everything. And if you can have the head coach, I think, and the quarterback on the same page, that's the guy that is the extension of your leadership. He's in the locker room, he's on the back of the plane, he's on his text machine talking to players and recruiting other players. He becomes the mouthpiece of your organization, and to have him have the head coach's back is a great feeling.
Rich said that you had to convince Al to sign Jerry. I'm just wondering, how did you convince Al?
Well, we had Tim Brown, and bringing in Jerry, who played the same position 20 miles across the bay. It was going to be, quite a production. But I didn't really have to sell Al. I just had to ensure him that we would distribute the ball as evenly as possible. And as long as we throw it over the fence a few times, Al would be okay.
I feel like we can learn from. One is attention to detail. So Rich told me about how if you said run a 14-yard out and someone ran 12 yards, you were one of the few people that can see that in real time. He said most coaches would actually have to go to the practice tape to see it and then point it out. And when you think about attention to detail, why is that so important, you think, in life for all of us? And how can we do a better job at that?
I think people need to understand time is the one thing we don't have enough of. A lot of guys are wasting time. A lot of guys are running out of time. Everybody wants to, everybody's taking away our time. We're not allowed to meet as long. We're not allowed to practice as long. So you better be listening carefully here. We put a lot of thought into these plays that we're about to install. We're going to go out and we're going to walk through the play, and then we're going to run through the plays, and then we're going to go do them at full speed. But attention to detail, not missing any assignments, and having every guy trust and believe in the guy next to him. That's the big thing. If you have one mental lapse, the play is dead. We got 10 other guys busting their ass. The right guard screws it up, it's over. The wide receiver cuts his route short. The quarterback takes the wrong drop. The running back blows a pickup. So you have to be like a constant energy source. How urgent time is. This attention to detail, there's a crisis going on here. We only have so many reps that we can get. So anyways, I was anal about that. I was obsessed with it. And I think I learned that from Bill Walsh and Mike Holmgren,
One of the things that you talk about, especially like in even the speeches that we could see on YouTube, is mental toughness. You mentioned both physical and mental toughness. What do you think we can do to be more mentally tough?
You got to talk about it every day. You got to show examples of it. You got to practice, being mentally tough. I lost my mom. I had my hip replaced. I lost my job. It would have been easy to curl up in the fetal position and blow away. But I just think talking about mental toughness, showing examples of mental toughness and effort daily, that's part of great coaching, great leading, great teaching. You can be as physically strong and as talented as anybody in the world, but if you don't have mental toughness, you aren't going to win a championship. You are not going to be a great success. But, I just like showing guys that overcame things. I like having witnesses, people come in and speak to the team, wounded warriors, badasses that are dealing with adversity in a positive way. Just don't curl up in a fetal position and become a drug addict and an alcoholic. You know what I mean?
Go the other way. Yeah, go the other way. I love that. Learning.
Take a dive. A lot of people take a dive in adversity. We used to say thrive in adversity. And that's when you get down 27-10, look what this opportunity has given us. You know what we have an opportunity to do? We got a chance to come back and shock their ass. But if you look at it like that, I think that's just a thought.
I heard your mom probably could have been an NFL recruit. She knew so much about football. I also read that she was a teacher. Do you feel like she shaped your coaching style in some way, shape, or form?
Oh, no doubt. She's an elementary school teacher, and I think teachers, preachers, doctors, policemen. I think a lot of those professions, the most honorable coaches, the most honorable professions have been hammered by just outsiders with different thoughts. You know, I remember my mom, she would say, "Hey, Bobby, you did a great job. You got 85 out of 100. Why don't you come in tomorrow morning? I'll help you get 90." And then Bobby'd come in and they'd work all morning and they'd get 90. She said, "Hey, Bobby, why don't you stay after school this week and we'll get them all right." And then the new headmaster comes in and says, "We don't want you meeting with these young kids before or after school because it's not fair to the ones that can't." So my mom quit teaching. She said, "Screw you, I'm out of here." You know?
That's
So
funny.
yeah, that's how I coach Rich Gannon, you know? I said, "Rich, one of these days you're going to get on the airplane and you're going to smash me in the chest and you're going to say, 'Wait till you see this film. I graded out at 100%, kicked their ass.'" And one day he did that. You know what I mean? So I think you keep pushing for excellence. You keep pushing for perfection. That's the only chance you got to hit it.
You know, one thing Rich said that really stood out to me is that like you, as maybe good or bad as things were, like you were always positive in front of the team, right? Like when you were speaking and addressing them, it seemed like that was a conscious thing that you kept this positive atmosphere. Do you feel like that was natural or was that nurtured?
You know, it takes a little skill to do that sometimes, you know, when the boss is yelling at you, the media is crawling up your butt, you know, your wife is on your case. You know, there's some times now it's tough and you're not feeling good. Sometimes you're tired, you just don't feel good. But I think the front man, whoever it is, whoever's talking to the team, um, you know, you got to always have the team's interest in mind and try to be positive. I always tried to lead from a positive standpoint.
I'm very curious about this. When you think back, like what you can share, what led you to getting traded? Because that to me, that looking back, like that doesn't really happen anymore, right? And obviously for Raiders fans, that was a day that we don't forget.
My contract was coming up, and obviously my agent and the Raiders, we thought we had a contract agreed upon, but I guess we didn't. There were some breakdowns there. We're not gonna rehash all of that, as painful as it may be. But you know, Al traded me to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I got a call from the Glazier family late one night, and where actually Al called me and says, "Do you want to talk to the Glaziers?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And that was when the wheels got put in motion. But it was a contract dispute, evidently, and you know, that was a tough time. That was a tough transition for sure.
But one of the things I want to talk about was just the QB camp. You recorded something like 63 episodes. I mean, you spent time with Josh Allen, Mahomes, everybody in between. And one of the things that I noticed, Coach, through that was like I would look at the body language of the other person on the other side. And I often think about like, how can I become more self-aware? I imagine some of these guys you thought were self-aware and some of them maybe weren't as self-aware as they should be. But what can we learn about being more self-aware, maybe through some of these interviews that you did through that show?
I think it's really important. You know, your body language is one of the most important communication skills that you have. Every time I call a play, you know, if you're, you know, oh shit, you got that bad luck, man. You know, I like to see the tail wagging when my dog comes home. I don't want to see him hovered over, you know. But take notes, have eye contact, you know.
Did you ever
Don't,
see that? Like some of the guys would be in there and you're thinking like, this dude's not even like, I just showed him
yeah.
like 3 picks that he threw. And he's like,
Yeah. And those are the guys that don't make it. It's a great analogy. It's a great correlation. You know, guys that I think young people in general, I have 3 young sons. I think they would all tell you they need to learn to listen better, sit up in a chair better, take notes better, turn off their phones, concentrate, be there while you're there. And I think that was the beauty of those shows. And really, that's how it is when coaches go visit these quarterbacks one-on-one away from the combine. They spend time with them and they want to see what type of mental aptitude they have and what type of concentration that they have, because your teammates are watching you when you're the quarterback. Everybody's kind of looking at you. And if you're slouched over and you're not totally invested, they're going to pick up on that.
Cunningham, Rodney Pete, Favre, all these guys you spent time around, and quarterbacks make mistakes. They're not perfect. When I think about like, how do I move on from a bad play in life, right? And you've been around some of the best. What can we learn from them in terms of moving on to the next play?
That's all part of mental toughness, right? I mean, you can't come unglued when you make a mistake. I think every interception, every bad play has a story. So I think the first thing you do is you correct it. Why did we do that? Don't just start screaming, what the hell did you do? Well, there's a reason why you made that decision. So let's get to the bottom of it. Let's learn from it. Okay. Let's not make that mistake again. And then let's move on. Some guys can't move on. Some guys, they don't play one snap at a time. And our whole philosophy was one snap at a time. It's a good snap, forget about it. Next snap. If it's a bad snap, good snap, forget about it. Next snap, one snap at a time, and try to string good snaps in a row together.
I love that. To your point, don't just forget it. Learn from the situation. And then
we don't have time to dwell on it either. We don't have time for a 45-minute lecture. We got to get on to the next series. And, guys make mistakes. That's human nature. But don't make the same mistake again, or Chucky will come out and lose his mind.
You're talking to somebody who wants to make an impact in this world. Maybe they're early on in their career. Are there 2 or 3 pieces of general life or career advice that you would impart on them?
I think the number one thing is find your passion. Find something that you're passionate about. My brother Jim he was a valedictorian, number 1 in his class. He's a doctor. He wanted to be a doctor. Hell, I wanted to be a football coach. And my mom and dad, they supported me. If that's what you want to do, go for it. And I got pushed and prodded and directed in the right way. But find your passion, man. And then do what Bill Walsh says. Go accumulate some knowledge. Go out of your way to, study it. There's so much access on the phone now that we never had when we were kids. Go to a clinic. Go drive over there and try to meet somebody yourself. But find your passion and then start working your butt off. Accumulate some knowledge. And I think the big thing I learned was you tell your employer, whoever it is, that you're going to offer them 2 things. You're going to give them loyalty and work ethic. And those are 2 things that, I took pride in, being loyal to the team I was with and working harder than anybody else could work.
I love that. Coach, I appreciate you leaning into this. Do you feel like there's anything we missed?
Just be genuine. When you're a leader, just be genuine, be yourself. Don't go on Tony Robbins' channel and steal all of his ideas. But that doesn't mean you can't go steal a few thoughts. You know what I mean? But I took a lot of pride in putting in the effort, the preparation, teaching and developing and being honest with these guys. I think those are the key things.
Your interviews, I remember just watching like one of the first ones. And to me, those are the hardest things to do because you see people, maybe players, transition to media stuff. And it's hard, but you hit the ground running. And I thought to myself, like, oh yeah, he's been doing this for years, right? Like interviewing players, Gruden camp. And so I hope you continue to do the interviews because I feel like you're such a natural at it. And I feel like we can learn a lot from people. I mean, you had some guys on that I would have never really, I knew who they were, but like I would have never learned from them in that environment. And so I hope you also continue to do that too.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. You're a good man. You're a good interviewer yourself, my friend.
No, I appreciate it, Coach. Thanks so much.
Yep. Stay in touch if we can do anything.
All right. Thanks, Coach.